Following the Spanish-American War, the U.S. colonial acquisitions in the Pacific put them in a different position in terms of influence in the region. But before they could trade with China and Japan, they had to deal with the current state of those nations. For example, China had dealt with spheres of influence with the Europeans. Spheres of influence, we're basically just talking about areas within China that the European countries had particular privileges in, or perhaps control over, but not really formally, but they did. Japan had an isolationist policy. They wanted no part of people coming in or going out necessarily. It was just like, leave us alone. You can't influence our land no matter how much money you think you have. So they're all about isolationism. Okay, so this is problematic until 1898. John Hay, our Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State, announces the open door policy, which means countries have equal access to China, to trade with China. So this is the open door policy. Okay, so that's 1898 open door policy. Out of fear of kind of influence of Western civilizations, in 1899, not too long after, the Boxer Rebellion erupts, and it's actually really significant, not just because this group of Chinese citizens are concerned about Western influence, but that an international army comes and puts down the rebellion. So this kind of tests that open door policy. It tests not so much the spheres of influence, but just how much influence the United States has in the region. At the end of the day, John Hay, with the open door policy and with the forces to put down the Boxer Rebellion, they're trying to protect U.S. businessmen in the region in China. Okay, it's an example of foreign intervention, right? So in Japan, their isolationist policy is kind of broken down in 1853 when Matthew Perry, the Commodore, arrives with his gunships. Okay, so he's kind of opening up Japan to the Western world, and this is interesting because Japan becomes the first major industrial power in Asia in terms of modern industry. This is really going to be significant leading into the 20th century, as well as becoming, a threat to China, and also a potential threat to Russia in the region, and the kind of influence that Russia had. Speaking of which, it's not long before Japan defeats China and Russia. Okay, it's not long before they're at war and Japan comes out on top. This is kind of really significant from the point of view of the United States, because this makes Japan an imperial power, and it also means that the peace process that they go through between Russia and Japan is led, initiated by Teddy Roosevelt, from which he actually gets the Nobel Prize. So this is kind of an overview of what's happening in terms of foreign policy right after the Spanish-American War. Pretty soon we're going to be looking at isolationism in the next video in terms of the United States' position on war and foreign powers, and what that's going to look like in our struggle to stay out of the issues in Europe. What Wilson is is pledging and promising in terms of keeping us out of war as he runs for re-election.